Let's talk Year of the Villain and how it's rolled out so far and what people came to expect and what they got. Hey there, this is Perch. DC is doing their Year of the Villain crossover, or event, or banner, depending on how you call it. You have to be careful with these names now because the word event has been applied to so much that you no longer know what exactly you're getting when you say event. But for those of you who don't know, and probably everybody who's reading comics does, DC through the Justice League basically been running this story since Metal, but more through the No Justice, No Justice, just I the plays on justice have I'm exhausted. By, if you listen to these videos regularly, you might get the impression that I do not have a good memory. And the truth is, no, I have a pretty good memory. Like I can pick out storylines from 30 years ago, 40 years ago. I would be more than willing to take that Tom Brevoort challenge of who knows Marvel continuity better. I'm willing to bet I would win. I'm just saying. I've sparred with obsessive people in shops before, and anyway, but is the events, there's in recent times there's been so much start stop with events and branding and naming, and sometimes the name changes, that it's become a wash. I remember the stories, I remember the plots, I remember the whole thing leading up to this, basically that the source fall had a crack in, led in a lot of things that were bad. Perpetua is trying to be summoned by Lex Luthor, and he's got a doorknob. It's cooler than that. That doesn't make it sound very cool, but it's an interesting concept where they're trying to tip kind of the spirit of the universe, if you will, over to Doom, and and then bad things happen. So Justice League's trying to avoid that. But Rennie, anyway, so spinning out of this storyline was this attempt by Lex Luthor to really amp up the villains. Now, one thing that's not, he sent all these drones, drone attack, to basically offer gifts to all the villains across the DC universe. And the gift would be something along the lines of a souped up power set or some thing that they've always been, struggling for, or, just something that helps them fulfill their mission. And, I, one thing that hasn't been terribly explained, or I think it has, but it's still kind of fuzzy to me anyway, is how Lex Luthor is giving these gifts. I mean, the Legion of Doom is pulling their resources together, but like some of the gifts get, like we're gonna do this to you. Why didn't you? Why now? Like what additional resources did you get that's allowing you to do this, or is it simply like you're working with Brainiac now and you've got I don't know, that's been a point of slight confusion. In detail, it does not matter. But anyway, the point is they have this Year of the Villain banner that goes on all the DC titles, or most of them. And it's basically informing the reader that at some point during this issue, it will cross over, or at least the themes of Lex Luthor's gift and meddling with villains will be felt in the comics. And this is very much in terms of, I would say, connected crossover. It's a lot more like Acts of Vengeance than, say, War of the Realms. And here's why. So War of the Realms, you could read a tie-in comic, or a comic that is, you could read Squirrel Girl, and you're interrupted in the story. The entire story has Squirrel Girl fighting giants and very much immersed in the War of the Realms storyline. You can't avoid it. That comic is a War of the Realms comic with Squirrel Girl. Acts of Vengeance was, the plot there is that a bunch of the villains kind of decided to swap the people they normally fight to kind of catch the heroes off guard. And so it was a villain fighting a hero fighting a villain they haven't normally fought before. But the Acts of Vengeance part of it, like the cabal of villains kind of plotting, was a page or sometimes no pages. Sometimes it was like a panel of a villain going, like flashback, like, hey, I'm going to go beat up She-Hulk, and you're going to take the power pack over here. And they're like, okay, we got it. And it's like a panel, and then you get a regular old comic story of a villain going at the heroes. So if you read none of the other Acts of Vengeance titles, you wouldn't be confused. It wouldn't be weird. You wouldn't feel like there was a you're missing something, or there was it stood on its own. It felt like a normal title with some Acts of Vengeance to it, not not completely immersed in that storyline. So You're the Villain is much more of that. It's much more of the comic by and large can be read just on its own. It's doing its own thing. It's not interrupting, whatever storyline was happening before is still kind of clocking along, and there's been no interruption. That's fine. But in terms of marketing, and here's that's good, by the way. I think readers tend to like that better. It's not, you don't want to do it all the time. Sometimes you want to save up your ideas and you want to do a really super powerful, awesome storyline, and run it, and you want to have it be completely immersive to the reader. That's cool. Civil War was like that. Civil War was a big enough idea and had enough hype and marketing and art talent and other things behind it that interrupting other books made sense. Mostly the X-Men Civil War tie-ins, I always felt were really off-putting, and did not help much of anything. But anyway, by and large, I think that, and Secret Invasion, I think, had enough of that kind of weight to it, where it could do that. But so what's gone wrong with You're the Villain? Well, yeah, I mean it's early. So first of all, we haven't seen if it can truly stick the landing or not. We're not even sure kind of what the landing is going to be. It's kind of a little hard to tell at this exact moment what we're in for. But it doesn't feel like it's going to really kind of be the impactful event. I mean, what DC always hopes is that, yeah, even though you don't have to buy every comic, the hype and the excitement around You're the Villain and these villains getting all souped up will cause you to buy other comics. That's why they do it. They don't do it to say, hey, here's something fun for people who are buying the comics they're normally buying, and then we'll call it a day. They're doing this so that you'll buy more. They're doing it so that you're picking up Nightwing every month, and then you're like, you know what, I'm gonna pick up Batgirl and Flash because I like that You're the Villain story in Nightwing, and I want to see how they're doing it over there. That's what they want to have happen. That's not happening. We're not seeing the halo effect, if you will. You are seeing more attention and hype and excitement around the core books, around Justice League in particular. That's interest has ticked up for that, but it's not creating that sales halo for other books, and that's okay. I mean, it's not like that makes it a failure, other than they kind of the whole purpose of this event is to create that halo from a sales perspective. Stories have been more or less fine. I think the part of the tragedy, maybe is the best way to put it, of these books is that the way events have rolled out by Marvel and DC in the past to be immersive, and it's like the world will never be the same again, and there's all this kind of aggressive punch in the face hype, that doing an event like this one, they have almost the weird reverse effect where readers are picking up titles and they're like, okay, let's see how Nightwing is completely changed, and then they flip through it and like, oh, there's one page at the back. What is this? This is crap. And I've stopped a couple. I'm like, hey, but you like Nightwing, right? Like, yeah, I like Nightwing. You like the storyline, right? Yeah, I do. So why would you want the story and the whole comic interrupted by some outside event? Why would you even want that? And then they stop thinking, oh, I guess you're right. I guess, this is actually better that they're not interrupting my story and letting the creator more or less do what they want normally anyway. So, but it's sad that the events, the onslaught of events and things we've gotten have led us to that point where, you're the very, it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. So the readers are like, well, I was expecting earth changing events in this book. And if they got those earth changing events, be like, well, I was expecting, my story not to get interrupted. Like, you can't win. But the other challenge, I think, with You're the Villain that has come about is just there's a cynicism, I guess, that's crept back into the DC universe. Rebirth tried to get rid of that cynicism, but they were not able to. There's a cynicism that's returned, and the cynicism is that none of this really matters. that you just kind of wait it out, and in a year, the heroes will be back fighting their things, the villains will be back to more or less normal, and none of this is really gonna matter. So, keep buying the comics you like, and that's good, but don't buy into any of the hype, because there's none of the hype is going to work at this point. And DC I'll tell you, DC is hitting this more than Marvel, which is kind of a surprising statement, and you might wonder why I say that. Um, Marvel has certainly overhyped plenty in the recent past. They've killed the. Sorry, there's a little pause there. Some guys like in the middle of the road just standing there, and I'm like, what are you doing there, pal? The idea of doing this while I'm driving, I think, is good. It gives me something to do. No offense, not all about me, but it does make the commute a lot more friendly and happy. But you do, I still pay attention to the road, because I don't want to run my car off the road. And I see just the weirdest stuff. I just every now and then I get interrupted by the weirdest. Here's a guy in a weird. He's got no pants, and he's in the middle of the road wandering around. It's like, Seattle. Thank you, Seattle. You're the best. Anyway, what I was saying is, in terms of kind of hype and expectations, where that cynicism comes in. So Marvel had this, I'd say, a few years ago, when it was Marvel Now Again, Marvel All New, All Different Now, Marvel No For Reals This Time Now. They had this kind of almost yearly relaunch, reboot, branding, title thing. And we saw definitely diminishing returns. If you look at the Uncanny Avengers book by Reminder, which was one of the kind of the flagship titles that was going to come out under I don't remember if that was Marvel Now or U Marvel, or I don't remember which particular Marvel brand that was, but it sold pretty well, and the other number one issue sold pretty well, and there was some general kind of enthusiasm about that coming out of AVX. That was kind of the state of the world. And then they did it a bunch, and you saw the relaunches, and the hype train that followed was less and less each time. More and more irritation, I would say, from fans with each successive launch. And what has also happened, or what happened there, is it kind of came out the tunnel on the other side, where certainly they're not getting the big boom with new brand launches and new number one things, but they're also doing less of them, because they realize they kind of killed the golden goose. But fans have kind of, you come to expect this kind of nonsense, and you stabilize and find your own way. So fans did get somewhat excited for War of the Realms. That died quickly. They are excited about Absolute Carnage. They were excited about Hunted. So they've kind of come through the other end. DC, on the other hand, I think had a 1-2 punch that's really impacting Year of the Villain in a negative way. And that was first, 2 years ago, they did Rebirth, and it was a return to optimism. And then that did very well from a PR perspective. I still think DC had a huge updraft behind them, and they squandered it with a couple of bad events. First, Doomsday Clock started. It was going to be late. It started to become very clear it was going to be late. Metal did well, and there was a lot of excitement around Metal. So they did Rebirth. They did Metal. Both those things are kind of a 1-2 good fan love push for DC. But the follow up to Metal was No Surrender was Avenger, No Justice. I think it was No Justice. Anyway, that event series felt clunky. That didn't do as well. It was not. Metal was a very clear, very streamlined, very understood event, and No Justice was not. It was. It went too big concept too fast, and it confused people, and it didn't land right psychologically. And at that same point, you've got Doomsday Clock now going to be late and just kind of spiraling into no man's territory. You have a promise of the Three Jokers storyline, and then nothing. That's kind of just in mystery land nowhere. And then you have the Tom King Batman series, which is a lot more kind of a downer than people are expecting. And so you have all these things kind of erode the the spirit of fan love optimism. And you have the new age of heroes, you have the new titles, but there was a bait and switch where you were promised one creative team, and the creative team quickly vanished. And that had been happening, still is happening over at Marvel, but at DC, this was, more of a new disappointment, if you will. It was not what fans were promised or expecting. So it become a lot of cynicism over a year. And I think whenever you promise the fans a lot of things, you generate a lot of optimism, you get them excited about something, and you don't complete that task. It's still very fragile. You don't let it harden. You don't finish the job. They needed another year or 2 years of just really good fan service, really good, listening to what fans wanted. And instead, they had a short little burst, got everybody's hopes up, and then you had a bunch of kind of disappointing events that by themselves were not terrible, but collectively really, really hurt things. And, from the Vertigo relaunch that was just clunky and clumsy and had some pretty terrible stories, it just didn't live up to the legacy of Vertigo. And then, of course, you had Heroes in Crisis, and you had Wally, who was really the symbol of that optimism, become a mass murderer by accident, but still, and that was really poorly received. So you have that, and then simultaneously you have the whole Brian Michael Bendis is coming, and I think that DC misunderstood two big factors where Bendis was concerned. First, for DC fans, long-term DC fans, a lot of them didn't like the idea of Bendis because they have entrenched themselves with DC, not Marvel, and Bendis was the face of Marvel. So, they spent years saying, I don't like those Marvel books. I don't like those Bendis books. I don't like that Bendis take on things because they were loyal, hardcore DC fans. And then suddenly it's like, oh, he's coming to DC. So now you've got to do an abrupt turn in your mind of saying, oh, this guy I've been complaining about as a reason why I don't like that other company is now in my company. And, how do I feel about that? So I think you had that factor going on. And then the other thing that I think DC misjudged with Bendis was it was announced he's coming on to Superman. And Superman had just kind of crawled, stumbled, pulled itself, if you will, into a big fan favorite territory. The sales weren't there, but it was growing. And fans liked the Jonathan Kent. They liked the return of Superman. They liked the difference between the New 52 Superman and the Superman they had today. There's a lot of like, hey, Superman's on the right track. And it's on the right track for a bunch of, for lack of a better word, homegrown DC talent, DC creators who are, people they've been with the company for a long time, loyal DC people, DC people we love are doing Superman, and it's on the right track. And then suddenly it's like, hey, the Marvel guy is coming in, and he's going to be on this book. And so there's a lot of skepticism coming in about this. And then immediately kind of retconning, removing, they had DC fans could always point to Superman and say, look, see, for you loser Spider-Man fans who had the erasure of the Mary Jane Peter marriage, look what DC has done. We've got the Lois Clark, and they're a happy couple, and they've got a son, and it's fun, and it's good comics, and see, this can work. And then Bendis came in and kind of immediately kind of ripped the family apart. As aged Jonathan had the angry crazy dad intercepting the family dynamic, and Lois is not pseudo separated from Clark, but they're running a storyline where she's cheating on Clark and Superman, and the world knows it. And it's like all these elements just took it in a left turn direction from what fans liked. And the funny part is, if Bendis had come in right after the New 52 Superman and run these storylines, he'd probably be much better received because he'd be, it's still an improvement over some of the Superman stories we've had in the past, but here we are. So now we're at Year of the Villain, and Year of the Villain is, it's the right move of having this big thematic event that's going on that doesn't require you buy all the titles. In that sense, it is fan friendly, but it's weighed down by all this other junk. And so it's struggling to find its footing. It's funny, if You're the Villain had immediately followed Metal, so now rearrange some things. You have Metal come out, and you ditch no surrender, or no, sorry, ditch no justice. Is that somebody's gonna just read me in the comments? Um, Ditch that event or alter it so it's a more streamlined, does not have as much of the high concept sci-fi stuff, and set up the storyline for Justice League quicker and faster, a little bit easier for casual fans to hop on with and digest, and then run You're the Villain, like a year ago. I think it would have been a natural springboard out of the optimism rebirth era. Even though it's all about villainy, it still would have been, readers are smart. They know that the all about villainy is going to lead to ultimately have big heroic triumphant return. That's kind of where it sits. It's an interesting thing. It's not selling particularly well, or rather, it's selling as it was selling. It hasn't created that halo effect, and that is a shame. But what do you think? Are you reading You're the Villain? Are you into all this? What do you think about this whole DC? This topic got a lot bigger than You're the Villain. So, what do you think about all of it? Do I make a decent point, or am I on the wrong track? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, tell a friend, please. Uh, I need to start adding post-credit little scenes and comments to the end of this so people stick to the end. I don't know why. Actually, it doesn't matter. But thanks for listening.